Uh, Sometimes what they do is they watch it later. There's people who watch this as an archive, much more than people who tune in. This is Rabbi Tobin. We're studying Tractate Sanhedrin. Today is February 11th, 2019, and we're about to get started as soon as we get ourselves organized here in the room. What usually happens is people who have missed class like to go back and pick it up, and then some people are just kind of window shoppers. They browse around, watch what we do. All right, we might be using the board a little bit today. For those who wish to know where we're from, go here.
I got one for you.
Oh, thank you. That's who we are. And we hope you will come and you will enjoy. All right. What am I going to say about today? The truth is today is a lot of interesting stuff, but it's much ado about nothing. We have a digression. The entire class today is going to be a digression, and if we can focus on the digression and get through it, it will only be one class of digression. So where we have been, I have my note. No, that's where we were. Okay, we were doing the story on 26A2. We're on 26A2 in the Schottenstein of Tractate Sanhedrin, Chapter 3, Zeborer. We were talking about who is not a kosher witness, either to be a part of your Beit Din or to testify in court, or a new issue got added at the end of last class, which is to rely upon them as witnesses for the new moon or the setting of the months and the calendar. And we had kind of a unique story of Reish Lakish, who followed these two rabbis, Chia bar Zanoke and Shimon ben Yehotzadak, who evidently were fellow students of or colleagues of Rav Yehuda, and Reish Lakish is amazed, evidently, to hear that these two are able to intercalate the year to determine new moons and leap years and leap months while they are outside the land of Israel, which seems very counterintuitive and highly suspicious. He follows them, and they run into a couple people who seem to be violating sabbatical year produce. And that's why this comes into the tractate at this point, because the Sochrei Shvi'it, those who are selling for their own personal profit, Shvi'it produce, are not kosher witnesses. So this is kind of a little bit of an aside, where we have a story about people who are violating Shvi'it and the rabbis who defend them. So these two rabbis are outside the land of Israel, and they're defending Shvi'it appearances, giving Reish Lakish explanations, excuses, justifications, apologies for why these guys might actually not be violating Shvi'it. And Reish Lakish is looking at what's going on, and he's like, they're violating Shvi'it. They're plowing the field, they're pruning the grapes, they're doing what you're not supposed to do, and these other two guys who are already suspicious because they're doing leap year calculations outside the land of Israel are also now suspicious in his mind for defending the apparent Torah-breaking, brazen behavior of these guys.
But these two guys that he's complaining about is outside the land of Israel.
Well,
they're outside the land of Israel.
They're going to be outside the land of Israel when they do their month calculating thing. They would have to be in the land of Israel for Shvi'it to apply, so maybe we're at an earlier stage in their journey when Reish Lakish has this interaction with them. We don't have a good timeline of this story. We have to add a lot of things. There's another layer of it that Reish Lakish has added.
Otherwise, what are they complaining about?
Exactly.
Isn't there's a whole tractate on
Yes.
how to calculate this and everything. I would think that this aspect would be in that tractate.
Well, it is, and what happens is this sugya, as often happens, shows up elsewhere, and we're just getting a version of it here. The other thing that happens, and the only thing that happens that's relevant to us, is Reish Lakish also presumes that these are Kohanim. And it comes, what they learn out of it, though the story itself does not by any means clearly make this unavoidable. You need to know this is the conclusion for this to be the conclusion. they are Kohanim, and therefore this is part of why Kohanim are suspect for Shvi'it, or he knows they're Kohanim because for people to be suspect, and we know Kohanim are already suspect, then these suspect people must be Kohanim. It's kind of convoluted. It doesn't really have a clear line, but we had this concept of Shvi'it getting mixed into Truma, right? And there was the pile of Shvi'it produce, and it had a little bit of Truma in it, and can the priest still eat it? Because the Truma might invalidate, or the Shvi'it might invalidate, and that whole story also led us to believe that Kohanim are suspect regarding Shvi'it, because they eat stuff other people can't eat all the time, so they might wrongly think that they can eat this thing that other people don't eat, and therefore they are suspect as being lax like that. Notice the rabbis are not thinking that Kohanim are inherently learned. Right? That's a very low-level misunderstanding to think, well, I can eat stuff people don't eat, and therefore I'm eating Shvi'it. That means they just have never read the Torah. Right? So to be a Kohen is a birthright. It doesn't mean you have an education. And that's how the rabbis would view them. The Kohen can easily be an Am Haaretz, an ignoramus in the rabbi's view. Okay, so there was all that. And we're on 26a2. And on the right-hand side in the English, you have the Baraita, that the entire mixture of Truma Shvi'it gets left to rot. Rav Chia said in the name of Ula, this teaches us the Kohanim are suspect to the laws of Shvi'it. And then we have Chia Bar Zakana and Shimon ben Yehotzadik, and they come to the conclusion that Reish Lakish is a nudnik. And this guy is argumentative. This guy is a troublemaker. And so when they get to the place that they're going to do these calculations, they go up to the top of the building to do their observations, their astronomical observations, and they pull the ladder up behind them so Reish Lakish can't follow them. What's Reish Lakish going to conclude? I didn't believe these guys. They've got lousy answers to basic halachic questions, and now they're not letting me see what they're doing. There's no way they get the hashgacha. I mean, right? They're not getting the hechsher from him. He's not going to approve them. He's not there to approve them. He doesn't have to approve them. They are also rabbis. So he's coming back, and he's going to be reporting on them. So when he comes back to Rav Yochanan, which is 26a3, he says to Rav Yochanan, B'nei Adam ha'achshudin al hashvit ksherim la'aber shana. If they can't figure out Shvi'it, how are you going to let them set the calendar? And then he changes his own mind. This is just review still. And he says to himself, Lo kashyali. You know, I could even answer that question, because the Chava Shlosha Roe Vakar, they're like 3 cattle herds. And Rabbanan Achosh V'naihu Samuch, and the rabbis, had the Shlosha Roe Bakar, which was in our Mishnah, which would have been involved in testifying on the setting of the calendar and looking at the new moon, because they're out there. But then again, I think the rabbis themselves did that calculation by themselves, so they didn't need the 3 cattle herds within their minyan to make the Beit Din, because there was rabbis there already enough to make a Beit Din, so maybe they listened and maybe they didn't. So he's kind of going back and forth in his own mind here, Reish Lakish. V'hadar v'amar, and then he returns and he changes his mind again, and he says, Lo dami, you know what, that case is not similar. The hatam hadorim nu rabbanan the ibura tahahu shata. The rabbis subsequently voted and they set the year themselves. Hacha kesherashimhu. Here, with these guys setting the year, they're going to be different than cattle herds. Why are they different than the cattle herds? Because they came in as 3 cattle herders. They said, look, this is what we saw in the sky. And the rabbis were working out all their math. And the cattle herders and the math lined up, but there were enough rabbis to make the decision by themselves without the cattle herders, so it just kind of helped, but they didn't need them, so their testimony isn't like legally binding. In the case of these 2 rabbis who have gone off to Asiya to figure out the calendar, they're the ones setting the calendar, right? So you can't put them into this category of Roe Bakar, this kind of, maybe they're kosher, maybe they're not, and use them, right? And so he's coming back and he's saying they're like, cattle herders who you didn't really need. They're like a kesher risha'im. They're a cabal. They're a group of bad guys. He uses the word Russia. And Kesher Risha'im Einu Mina Minyan. You can't include Risha'im in your minyan for determining things in court. Rabbi Yochanan responds basically, Oy, why do you have to say such things? He says, Daka, this is very painful to me. Right? So that's understood as Rabbi Yochanan saying to Reish Lakish, you can't say such things about people, about rabbis. This is stressful. He doesn't say you're wrong. He doesn't say you're right. He says this is very painful. Yes?
Has greater credence. Witnesses that see the horns of the moon or the calculations for it. I'm trying to get which wins?
I think what we're looking at in the Babylonian Gemara is they have to rely on calculations because they're removed from the land.
Right.
So but they can't eliminate the validity of the system of witnesses and how important and how elaborate that was. So in this point, they're making that move, where the Roe Bakar would have been really important in the land of Israel, because I don't care what your calculations are. Look,
You see the slither.
look, right? I mean, math. What's math? There's a moon up there, as opposed to over here where you have calculations and only calculations. And so this is really kind of a bridging point between those two historical periods. You have Reish Lakish who's a Tana, but is being processed by the Gemara. And these guys are leaving Israel to do their calculations, right?
I'm just thinking if it's also astronomy, that you need to be at a certain point to see the stars that help you know about the extra month, the
Right.
direction, because of the 19-year cycle that we have to go through
Right.
to get it. So.
Well, they definitely had the only astronomical observation that they hadn't had time to figure out yet was precision, which is the slight wobble in the Earth, which makes the North Star in a different place slowly over time. The North Star actually kind of itself moves in an apparent circle in the sky over time, not because it's moving, but because the Earth's rotation has a little wobble in it. And you need a few thousand years or extra geosatellites, to measure those things to figure that out. So you can't use like a shipping log and records from 2,000 years ago and get in a boat with your astrolabe and follow the stars and think you're going to hit the same coast. You're not, because their measurements, the stars are in a slightly different spot than the exact same measurement would show today. So they didn't have that. But as far as the moon cycles and that stuff, they had that. They had that down. Yep.
What's the time differential with Hillel and this?
Hillel and this. Hillel is 100 years prior to Reish Lakish, and this Gemara is being put together probably 100 to 200 years after Reish Lakish. So from Hillel to this is 300, and Reish Lakish is a third of the way along that timeline.
Because basically Hillel figured the calendar out.
Hillel had the calendar figured out. Yeah, that's when it says they were doing their calculations, and the Roe Bakar were whoever they were. They had the calculations of the new moon, for sure, because the Greek Empire and the Roman Empire were sun calendars. So we had been justifying our moon calendar and the sun calendar for several centuries by this point. So they've got it all figured out.
So why did they have to go someplace else?
Well, sometimes it's by a day or so the math is close, and you have to look up, right? I mean, they had to look. They couldn't deny the sky, right? So you get a sense when they start talking about seeing the witnesses and lighting the bonfires on the tops of the hills to send the message out. You get a sense that eventually it becomes. It's really not fact-finding; it's theater. And there's a pageantry to it, and there's an eagerness to be the witness and to have these bonfires set up and to spread the word, and like you all know it's coming. It's like New Year's. Is it New Year's if the ball doesn't drop? It is, but we act as if it's the ball dropping that makes the new year start. 10, 9, 8, and then the fireworks go off. And the people across the river can see that the ball has dropped because the fireworks are going off. So there's a theater to it. But mathematically, they had it solid.
No, I was trying to figure out what Hillel's calendar.
Yeah.
Because it's obvious that they had Hillel's calendar.
We're still running Hillel's calendar today.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we're going to get out of this because that's just Chazara. That's just, looking back. And Chiazar, Noke, and Shimon ben Yehotzedek come before Rabbi Yochanan, and they say to him, he called us cattle herders. You didn't say anything. And the answer is, he could have called you worse. And what would I have said? And that's the end of that. So he kind of leaves it hanging in the air like he didn't call you the worst thing he could, and suck it up. All right, now the digression begins. That wasn't really a digression. It was more like the jumping off point to the major digression.
We'll almost call it comedy relief.
Right.
This was the transition.
Yeah, this is a transition to digression. My Kesher Rishayim. So, what is a band of bad people? All right. Shevna Hava Daresh Betlesar Rivata. So Shevna used to lecture to 130,000. Chizkiah Hava Daresh Bechadsar Rivata. And Chizkiah would only lecture to 110,000. All right. So Shevna's an interesting character. Shevna's in 1 Kings. Shevna is in 1 Samuel. Shevna is not in Chronicles. So Chizkiah, but he's presumed to be there because he's in the other two. So we're going to have to understand Shevna through biblical eyes and then now through rabbinic eyes. And it's the rabbinic eyes that drive the Talmud. So Shevna is named in the book of Kings at a very important moment. Chizkiah is king over Jerusalem, and the king Sennacherib of Syria comes and lays siege to the city of Jerusalem. And he's a big bad guy. He has destroyed the north, he has destroyed many of the towns and cities of Judah, and he has arrived at the gates of the capital with his thousands, his horses, his taunts, and his threats. And Chizkiah prepares by tearing down a lot of the houses of stone around the city and encasing the water springs on the bottom of the city of David. And you can go today and you can see the tunnels under there that were from this time, and there's actual inscriptions that commemorated how they saved themselves in the time of this siege by enclosing the water sources, which did two things. One, it deprived the besieging army of any water, because these are the water sources in that area, and it gave infinite water source to the people inside, and they weathered the siege. Of course, in biblical presentation, they weather the siege because of God. God is the one who saves them. And there's this whole kind of dance, and then the saving moment takes one verse. The dance goes like this. Sennacherib is out there, and they're doing the taunting thing. And Chizkiah has three guys. One of them is Shevna the scribe. He's called a sochem, a treasurer, perhaps. Okay? And that word's going to become important. So Shevna the Sochem is one of the three people who is sent in delegation out to the chief taunter of Sennacherib's army. And they go up and they have an interchange, which we don't really need to go read. It goes like this. We will do blah, 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 and your king is an idiot who's going to lead you all to starvation and death. And Shevna says, speak in Aramaic. He does say, he says, speak in Aramaic, which is the Babylonian language, okay? And don't speak in Judean, is what he calls the Hebrew, because the guys on the wall will hear you. And then the taunter continues in Judean in a louder voice directly to the men on the wall, we're going to blah, 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 and you're going to die horribly, and it's all because of Chizkiah. That's the interchange. Then Shevna, in the biblical tale, comes back to Chizkiah with the other two, They've torn their garments. They're in mourning and wailing. They relay what happened, which is, we're all dead. And Hizkiah tears his clothing and goes into God, probably the temple and the prophet Isaiah, and says, woe and alas for us, and what shall we ever do? and God's answer is predictable. Have faith and step aside while I kill these guys. And that's what happens. And then depending on whether you're in Kings or 1 Samuel or Chronicles, how they die or go away is slightly different. In one of the versions, God says, I will make them believe that they are falling prey to some other attack and they will foolishly run away. In another, I will destroy them. And then in the third, there's no God saying anything. God just destroys them. But whatever the version is, however it happens, immediately after this, they're gone. And God has been victorious and Jerusalem has been saved. So the question then is Shevna a good guy or a bad guy? In the straight biblical telling, it's not clear that he's done anything wrong. Right? Like you could say, why would he tell this taunter to speak only in Aramaic? He might be a diplomat and say, hey, I speak your language. Let's speak in Aramaic, the language of your kingdom, so that we can come to some kind of an agreement. Or he might be saying, let's speak in Aramaic so you don't scare the guys on the battlement, or he might be saying, let's speak in Aramaic so I can make a private deal with you. And the rabbis have chosen door number 3. So the rabbinic interpretation is that Shevna's a bad guy. He used this opportunity to try and establish a direct relationship with Sennacherib's forces, to be someone who's going to believe everything Sennacherib's guy has said. Hezekiah is leading us to our deaths. I represent a majority of the people in the town. If you will make a deal with me, I will turn the town over to you, and we don't need to have any bloodshed. And then the assumption of that is he himself wants to be made king as the price of turning coat and turning over the city to them. That's what he is doing in this story. That is not in the text of the Tanakh. That is absolutely non-negotiable, the rabbinic interpretation of what he has done. Okay? So for the Gemara, when we understand Talmud, that's Shevna. It's that Shevna that we're talking about. He's Sheva the Russia, Shevna the Russia. So once you're Shevna the Russia, now the rabbis, and you need to know all this to understand the digression we're about to enter. Pretty much every place else where a Russia exists, it can be Shevna. So if the Psalms talk about a Kesher Rishaim, a group of bad guys, it's fair game that the Psalms are talking about Shevna. Right? If there's a psalm line that can be interpreted as something a bad guy once did, it's fair to say it was Shevna, the bad guy, who did that thing in Psalms. Okay? Now, that's one thing that's important to know. The other thing that's important to know is that we're about to get a verse, and that verse is going to be what drives the rest of the digression. Okay? And once we get the verse, I'll put it up behind us, and we'll see how it drives everything else. Okay, so now.
Robert, what page are you on?
26A3.
26.
On the right-hand side. And it is the beginning of a major digression, so you haven't really missed anything, even though we're a half an hour in and I've given background and setup. They have an advantage, but they haven't gone any farther than you have.
Okay.
They just have background and setup. Okay, my Kesher Rishim. What is this cabal? Yes, digress is an understatement in this case. Shevna hava daresh bitlesa. So now, at the time, Shevna the Sochem used to get 130,000 people to his lectures, and the righteous king Chizkiah only got 110,000. Ay, can you imagine? Ki ata Sanchriv v'tzar alav d'Yerushalayim. When Sennacherib came and he besieged Jerusalem, he caused it pain. Katav Shevna pitka shada begira. Shevna wrote a note, and he shot it by arrow over the city walls to Sennacherib. Shevna v'siato hishlimu Chizkiah v'siato lo hishlimu. The note read, Shevna and his party conclude peace, but Chizkiah and his party do not conclude peace. Shneamar ki hine harasha'im yadrichun keshet konanut chitzam al yeter. Because as it is said in a verse from Psalms, which obviously must be talking about Shevna, it says, the wicked bend the bow and ready their arrow on the string. So, because you have a verse in Psalms that talks about the wicked bending their bow and readying their arrow on the string, and you know Shevna's a Rasha, Shevna must have had a bow that he bent with an arrow on the string, and what would he be doing with that? Sending a note to Sennacherib tied to that arrow. Is that in the Tanakh? It's not in the Tanakh. That's just what they're doing, okay? Now, Havaka Mistafei Chizkiah. Chizkiah is afraid. Amar Dilma Chas v'Shalom Nat Yadate de Kuchabrichu Bat Haruba. He said, God forbid, maybe the Holy One, blessed be He, is going to go with the majority. That's very rabbinic thinking, right? The majority of the rabbis get to set the halacha. Kevan deruba mimsere in hunami mimsere. And by the way, we're going to be twisting our tongues on Aramaic for the next 2 pages as well. This is all Aramaic, Gemara age stories.
Because Shevna likes to talk Aramaic.
Because Shevna speaks Aramaic. Okay, very good. Okay, so perhaps God is going to follow the majority.
How many people were here?
There's 240,000 people, a majority of whom go to listen to Shevna's lectures.
What was the total population?
I don't know.
I was going to say, it seems to me this is too many people for the area.
The archaeologists tell us that Jerusalem at its heyday was something like 3,000 people.
That's what I'm trying to say. So
Yeah.
where are they getting 250,000?
Correct. This is 250,000 people, the majority of whom go to one lecture hall that can hold them all while Shevna speaks.
I understand, but that's what I'm saying.
It's huge.
The numbers are wrong or something's wrong.
We're in an Aramaic part of the Talmud, which means it's a Gadata. We're in storytelling time. Okay, this is Midrash, this is Agadah, this is... I wouldn't try and make everyone fit in the room, right?
So in other words, it's an exaggeration.
Someone in Lakewood is able to do that for you. I'll try and get their number. All right? I just can't do it.
I mean, if you just think about stadiums, we don't even have a stadium now. The biggest stadium was
Yeah.
like 50,000.
So obviously, then they're going to say it's a metaphor. This is the 130,000 who followed him and his writings, his teachings, his publications. Not that they were standing in one place, but okay. Chizkiah, according to this, is afraid because he knows he's a minority popular leader, right? His scribe is a more popular person and might be speaking for the majority of the people, and he's afraid that maybe God will protect the majority in what they want. So evidently he knows about the arrow thing. Right? Ba Navi V'Marlo, so the prophet comes and speaks to him, and the prophet that we know this from is Isaiah. Lo tamrum kesher l'chol asher yomar mazek kasher. Don't say a group concerning all whom this people say a group. All right, so klomar, and that's going to get interpreted as kesher rishaim hu v'kesher rishaim eno mina minyan. So this means don't worry about the people who are grouped together to follow the Risha'im, because God would never count them when he's figuring out the majority. A Kesher Tefillim, no matter how many of them there are, a Kesher Risha'im, no matter how many there are, they don't count when you do math. They're not included in the group. So you got 110,000 people following you. Those are the people God's going to listen to. He's not going to listen to 130,000 because they are Kesher Risha'im. They won't count. And so Kesher Rishayim doesn't count in a quorum. That helps us how? Because this is a digression from the Reish Lakish story, who followed the two guys into Asya to see how they could possibly do this thing which is impossible. And when they come back, he says they can't be included in the Beit Din to figure out what the month is supposed to be because they're Kesharim Ein Manim B'Minyan. They don't count in a minyan. So this is now the Agadah source text for the principle that a Kisha Rishayim does not count in a minyan. A Kisha Rishayim cannot be part of a decision-making process. Okay, so it's a legend based on that principle, which was brought up by the Reish Lakish story, and that's why these two things are here.
Did you need the full Sanhedrin of 70 to 81 people for the intercalation? Or,
No.
okay, but it's not like three.
I haven't really studied the exact mechanism of who sat in how many to determine the numeral. It was the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. If there were 5 guys missing, could they still do it? I don't know.
But it's not like
It's not like-
it's a bigger court for intercalation than it is for theft.
Yes. Yeah, this is a national, this is the national important issue, right? This sets everything. All right. 26a4. Now that we've brought up a story of Shevna, let's stay there for a while. All right. Halach lachtzov lo kever bekivrei Beit David. So we have the story later on where Isaiah rebukes him for carving out a burial place in the sepulchres of the kings under Jerusalem. This story has been appropriated. The biblical story has been appropriated towards this story to talk about Shevna. The original context is whether people had faith that God would save them in the siege or not. And there was a lot of metaphoric talk about our graves and our dying here, or our God delivering us and our living here. In that context, the Shevna figure is the bewailing, faithless, hopeless leader of the people who is saying, this is going to be our graves, we should be digging our graves, and carves out a sepulcher. The original context is not that he's carving himself a grave in the royal sepulcher because he thinks he'll be king one day, but because he thinks they're all going to die. Right? That's the original context. The Agadata is going to change that. The Agadata says that act of digging is still part of his plot to become king, and is an indication that he thinks he has a place in the burial place of kings, right? So it's his ambition and his arrogance and this side of his being a Rasha that is in play in that verse, okay? So again, we've got kind of the Peshat, if you look at the Tanakh, the simple meaning of it, and then you've got how the rabbis are understanding all of these texts as woven about a very ambitious Shevna. Okay, so he, and it doesn't say Shevna in the verse, went to hew out for himself a sepulchre among the sepulchres of the house of David, and Ba Naviva Marlo, and the prophet comes and says to him, Malacha po umilacha po ki chatzavta lecha po kaver. What are you here? Who are you here that you get to dig yourself a grave in this spot? That's Isaiah 22. Isaiah goes on. Hine Adonai mital tele gaver. Behold, God will cause you to wander the wanderings of a man, which is the next verse. So he's he's being told that you're not going to die, but because of your faithlessness, you will become a wanderer. So in the prophet Isaiah in 22, it's all warning the people about the coming destruction of Jerusalem and they're having to go off into exile, right? So the original meaning of this is, what are you doing bemoaning your fate and digging a grave for yourself? Yeah, you're a sinner. Yeah, bad things are happening. Yeah, you deserve to have punishment, but God's not going to kill you here. He's going to send you into exile, and you're going to become a hopeless wanderer for having broken the covenant and broken faith with God. That's what the original sense is. Here, it's a rebuke, and Amar Rav comes in and goes, Tiltula de Gavra kashe mid'itita. He says, a man's wandering is a lot more painful than a woman's. And the translations, the commentaries come in and say, look, a woman who is cast out and bereft and wandering homeless, people will take mercy on. A man walking down the street, they'll take no mercy on. So if you have two beggars on the street and one is a woman and she says, please help me and help my family, you have more rachmanis. If a man who looks like he could be working stands in front of you and says, please help me and help my family, it's human nature to be less forgiving, less understanding, less compassionate. There's a gender bias when it comes to homeless people.
Well, don't we have widows and orphans take priority?
Right.
So one might have, and you take a look at Cain, a wandering individual that had a tough life.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's just kind of the culture of the document. And the prophet goes on and he says in that same verse, Ve'otecha ato. I will wrap you all around. And Amar Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yossi the son of Rabbi Chanina says, Milamed shepar chabot tzaraat. The fact that the prophet rebuked him by saying, I'll make you the wanderings of man and will wrap you all around, means that he had tzaraat.
You had what?
Leprosy.
The skin disease, leprosy of the biblical affliction. Why? Katit hacha, because it's written here, ve'otechata, I will wrap you around. Uchatit hatam ve'al safam ya'ate. And there it is written, he will wrap himself up to his lips. So, we're going to have this structure in a couple of places. This is Aramaic Agadata. This is how you interpret Torah verses. And it's Katit Hatam and Katit Hacha, which is Aramaic for, sorry, which is Aramaic for the Hebrew, Katuv, Sham, and Katuv, Po. Okay? It is written there. It is written here. This is a very common rabbinic mode of interpretation. I have a word that exists in two completely unrelated texts. I know clear as a bell what it means in this text. Therefore, it means that same thing in this text. If the word was ato, was written in the case of the leper, then it means the same thing in the case of the prophet Isaiah rebuking the guy bewailing and trying to dig himself a grave. Okay? Those are going to be the same people. Now you need to know another rabbinic assumption. The Mitzorah, the person with the skin disease called Mitzorah, in rabbinic interpretation, that's a combination of two words, three words. Motzi Shem Ra. The person who gossips against other people. They take out an evil name. Why do we know this? Because in the story of Miriam, when she gossips against Moses, she's punished with Sara'at, and she becomes a Mitzorat. So she has Mitzorah. Therefore, in rabbinic interpretation, everybody who has the Mitzorah condition is being punished for gossip. So you need to know those things for this to make sense. So you have a principle that one word in one place means the same thing in another place. That's katit hatam and katit hacha. And then you also need to know it's being punished for sins of the mouth, verbal sins.
Some kind of physical condition.
They get a physical skin condition
Whatever that may be.
as a punishment for gossip or slander of their mouth. Lashon hara, lamed hey, tell it to me anyway. Right, that's the old childhood rhyme. You ever hear that one?
No.
I think this is-
And they don't teach that in your shul. They don't teach that in my shul either. I've never heard a rabbi say that.
Except now.
Lashon hara is a serious sin. It's one of the most common. You've got to read the Chafetz Chaim on Shmirat Lashon. It's a serious sin. In rabbinic interpretation, Mitzorah is the outcome of Lashon Hara. All right, so now let's understand this. So the prophet Isaiah, in his verse about the guy who dug his own grave, as a sign of his faithlessness against God, is punished to ever go and be a wanderer, and he because he's ato. So the otecha ato, he shall wrap himself around, which is the language Isaiah uses to describe his wandering, is understood to be like the Mitzorah guy with the skin disease who had to wrap himself in a garment as part of his affliction for the sins he had done with his mouth in speaking, right? So we know that the prophet here is using that same verb to wrap himself around because this guy sinned with his speaking when he said I should dig myself a grave. And the speaking that he spoke when he tried to talk to Sennacherib's taunter guy to try and make himself king. Or what the evil things he said to the people to make 130,000 of them follow him against Chizkiah. So this is actually a very elegant verse. Once you have the whole rabbinic system, why do they bring this Isaiah verse in for this guy? Because all those elements are there. He was sinning with his mouth. He goes off and becomes a wanderer with the word ato, which can resonate with the idea of a Mitzorah being punished for the sins of his mouth with ato, the same verb, the same root. Okay? So that's, I told you, we're in a digression. All right. But that's not all. There's more to Isaiah. Okay? So it goes like this. Sanuf yitznafachat nefa kadur el eretz rachavat yadayim, and so on. He, God, will encircle you as a hat, as a wall, to a wide open land. And they did bring you the end of this verse in the Schottenstein. And there you will die, and there your glorious chariots will suffer the disgrace you wished upon your master's house. Okay? So, this is a little less clear, and several of the things we're about to read right now are going to be a little less clear. So we'll just go with the interpretation Schottenstein gave us. God will encircle you. This is the wrapping around, is being understood as Isaiah telling him God will wrap you around like a wall around a city to a wide open land, and there you will die. So he will wrap you around and throw you out of where you were wrapped around. Tana, it's taught in the Baraita, Hu bikesh klon beit adonav lefichach nepach kvodo lekalon. He sought shame on his master's house, and therefore his own glory becomes shame. So midah keneged midah. You get punished with the thing that you were trying to do. You shamed your master, you get shamed. You tried to cast your master out of the palace in the city, you'll be cast out of the palace in the city. All right, ki havanape kaihu. So when he had left, Ata Gavriel achede ledasha be'ape mishrayate. So the Hebrew are the Misharatavs, the people who serve him. So when Sheva left, the angel Gabriel came, shut the gate in the face of Sheva's people, his servants. So he's alone. So Shevna has actually arranged the what do you call when you give up to the enemy? The surrender of the city. Thank you. I don't know why I couldn't come up with that. He has arranged the surrender of the city. He gets all of his followers to start following him out of the gate, and he walks out the gate of Jerusalem towards, and the archangel Gabriel comes in and smashes the gates closed behind him, leaving all his people in the city, and he's out there alone. And evidently he doesn't notice until he gets all the way up to the other army. And Amrulo, and they say to him, Mishiriatech hecha. So do they care if he's turning himself over to them? No, they want like 130,000 people to leave the city and not fight. That's what they want. So where is everybody? Where's your followers? Amar, he said to them, Hajubi. They turned around, they left me. Amrule, they said to him, Imken achochika mechayachat ban, which is from chiyuch, to laugh. So if so, you are laughing at us. Nikavuhu be'akevav, they bore holes through his heels. Utlau bezanve susehem, and they dragged him around behind the horses. V'hayu megarim oto ala kotzim v'ala habarkanim, and they ran the horses over thorns and thistles and sharp things as they dragged him around by his ankles behind them. It's not a good end for Shevna. No. By the way, it sounds like Achilles a little bit, as far as what. But Amar Rabbi Elazar. So Rabbi Elazar said, Shevna ba'al hana'ahaya. Shevna was somebody who was a master of pleasures. He was one who pursued pleasures. All he cared about was pleasures. There's a sense of sexuality here. I'm not sure exactly what form of sexuality is too licentious for the rabbis to mention, but it's not good. Katit hacha, and now we get the same structure. It is written here, it is written there. So they're going to find a word in the verse, and they're going to find that word in multiple places. Now this is really important because this time we're going to get a verse with a word, and there's going to be 3 different interpretations of that word, or of that verse. And we're going to go down all 3 of them, and the Gemara is going to look at all 3 of them, whether they work or not. Okay? So now our digression has grown a digression. Okay? So now we're beyond Shevna, into the verse about Shevna, into one of the words in the verse, and now we're going to try and understand what that verse means according to 3 different interpretations. Okay? Here we go. All right. It goes like this. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Ketit hacha, lech bo el hasochen hazeh. So it says, go to that sochen, and this is the Isaiah story about the guy who was digging the grave, which I said at the time doesn't say Shevna. It just says a sochen, but Shevna is referred to as a sochen in the verse where he goes out to talk to Sennacherib's people. So, same period of time, 2 sochanim, maybe it's the same sochen. The Gemara is going to say it's the same sochen, it's Shevna. Okay. So, we're going to talk about what the word sochen means. K'tit hacha, lech bo el sochen hazeh. In here, it is written, go to that sochen, which means a treasurer. U'chetiv hatam, and it says there, u'tehi lo sochenet. And it says in the case of David, when he's an old guy, remember how they bring the young virgin into his bed to try and warm him up? You remember this story? So David is dying in his bed, and he's completely non-responsive, and they bring him a young, nubile, warm virgin to be a sochenet, as a bed warmer for him. And she cuddles right up in next to him, and he's completely non-responsive. Right? That's the story. So she's called a sochenet. So what she's doing is the act of sechina, whatever that is. And this guy is being called a sochen, so his sin is something in that world of activity. So he's a guy who's looking for the warmth of the bed, and that's who he is. And that, I guess, is another indication of his being a rasha, being an evil or a bad person. It doesn't tell us any more details. It doesn't draw the connection any better than that. It's blaming. Drop it, move on. To another digression, this one coming from the verse in Psalms. Omer, ki hashatot yeharesun tzaddik ma yifal. So, the verse in Psalms that talked about the guy shooting the bow and the arrow, remember that one? The next verse says, and when the shatot are destroyed, what does the tzaddik have to do? Or what will the tzaddik do? So now we're going to talk about what are shatot and who's a tzaddik. Okay, but it's the second half of the verse about shooting the arrow, which showed up in the middle of the Shevna story. So since we were talking about a Kat Rasha'im, and we had to talk about Shevna, and since Shevna had a verse from Psalms which talked about shooting an arrow, the verse right after that in Psalms is this. So we're going to talk about that. So our digression has a digression from a digression. Okay, Ve'omer, ki hashatot yaharesun tzadik ma pa'al. When the shatot are destroyed, what does the righteous one do? And here are the 3 interpretations. Rav Yehuda and Rav Eina. Rav Yehuda and Rav Eina have 2 of the interpretations. So the first interpretation is that the shatot are Chizkiah and his band, his supporters. If they are destroyed, what will the righteous one do? So that means the shatot are Chizkiah and his righteous followers, and the tzaddik, who doesn't know what to do or has to do something, is God. Now, that's either Yehuda or Eina. The other one, V'chad Omer, the other one says, Ilu Beit Hamikdash Yeharas Tzaddik Ma Pa'al. He says, no, that it's not about Chizkiah. It's about the Beit HaMikdash. If the Shatot, meaning the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, is destroyed, what will the tzaddik do? What will God do? Okay, so those are the two interpretations of Yehuda and Eina. It's either Chizkiah and his supporters, or it's the Beit HaMikdash. Amar Ula. Ula comes in, on the other hand, and says, Ilu machshavotav shel oto rasha eina neharsin tzaddik mapa'al. He says, no, the Shatot are the evil thoughts of the bad person, which of course is going to be Shevna. So Ula comes in and says that the Shatot, if they are destroyed, is not if they are destroyed, but the thoughts of that very same Rasha, if they are not destroyed, what will the tzaddik do? And who's the tzaddik there? Chizkiah. So Ula has a completely different interpretation. He says that this verse in Psalms, which talked about Shevna shooting the bow, even though it didn't say Shevna, goes on and talks about, and if the Shatot are not destroyed, what will the tzaddik do? In other words, if evil Shevna is not destroyed, what will righteous Chizkiah do? So that's Ula's interpretation. We're going to look at the three and see if any of them make sense. Bishlema, it's okay, it's all good. Leman Amar ilu machshvotav shel ota rasha. So we're going to work backwards. It's okay for the guy who says that that Shatot means if the thoughts of the Rasha are not destroyed, what will Chizkiah do? Because Hainu dichtiv, because the verse says ki hashatot yahare soon. If the Shatot of Shevna are destroyed. V'leman damar Beit HaMikdash nami, and it's also good for the person who says Beit HaMikdash, because I have a source for that too. It's not a Torah verse, but it's a Mishnah. Ditnan, as it says in a Mishnah, Evan hayta sham mimot nevi'im harishonim. There was a stone there in the temples from earliest times of the prophets. Ushetiyah hayta nikret, and it was called Shetiyah. Shetiyah is now, we're saying that it's the Shatot being destroyed. Okay? Since it's the Shatot being destroyed, I had a verse that said Hashatot, fine. Here in the Mishnah, I have something that says Shtiyah. Shtiyah is being interpreted now as coming from Shatot.
What is chateau?
That's what we're arguing about.
Oh, sorry about that.
Shatot, Shtiyah. So, the foundation stone in the temple that was there from earliest times, according to the Mishnah, the Shatot, according to the Psalms, which will be destroyed. Okay, so we have a root that sounds like the same root. So the person who says that that verse is talking about the destruction of the temple has something to rely upon. Fine, Shatot means temple. However, we had three interpretations. What are we going to do with the last one? Ella laman damar Chizkiah v'siato. The person who said that the Shatot that are destroyed in the Psalms verse refers to Chizkiah, what's he going to rely on? Heicha ashkechan tzadike de ikari Shatot. Where do we ever find a tzaddik who's called a Shatot? What? How can you interpret it that way? It doesn't make any sense. Dichtiv, for it is written, the Gemara answers, Ki la mitzuke eretz v'yashet alehem tevel. For it is written in 1 Samuel and in Proverbs, we have this kind of a thing. For gods are the pillars of the earth, and upon them he founded the world. So, mitzuke aretz v'yashet alehem. So the word yashet here, founding them on them, is referring to the pillars, the mitzuke aretz, the pillars of the earth. V'ibait ema mehacha. And if you want, you could say it's from this verse, He flietza higdil tushia. He has shown wonderful counsel and vast wisdom, tushia. So, we could spend a lot of time parsing this out. The bottom line here is that the Gemara has changed Chizkiah to be a Torah scholar. The pillars of the earth are known by the rabbis to be Torah. And since we have a place that says the pillars, which we know are Torah, are the foundations of the earth, here too the foundation referred to by Shatot must be foundations of Torah. And in that day, what were the foundations of Torah? Chizkiah, the man most learned in Torah. So they've made the whole thing an allegory for Torah and Torah scholarship. That's what's happening here. You can parse it out, but that's what they're doing. So they say the person who says when the Shatot will be destroyed, that means Chizkiah, because Shatot comes from a thing that means pillars and foundations, and we have another teaching that says the foundations and pillars of the world are wisdom, and there's no wisdom that's not Torah, therefore they must be Torah. So if A equals B and B equals C, A equals A. Chizkiah is a pillar is a Torah is Chizkiah's person, Chizkiah is living Torah, therefore if any of these things are being destroyed, it's referring to Chizkiah. That's what just happened. It's very terse, but that's what they did. Okay? That's how you save the third person. Now, our digression of a digression will now have a digression. This is the fourth level of digression. And after this, it goes back to the original topics of the Gemara, okay? Now we're going to talk about tushia, the word wisdom, which just came up in this last teaching about trying to understand the shatot from Psalms. Shatot being the foundations being destroyed, okay? And we just made an analogy that shatot actually is from a word tushia, which is not your tushy. Notice that doesn't really work because it's shin, taf, taf, shin, but they're playing around. All right?
Sexy.
What's that?
Sexy.
And they're just playing around. Amar Rabbi Chanan. Okay, Rabbi Chanan says, or this is Rav Chanan, actually. He's not a Tana. He's an Amora. Lama nikra shema tushia. Why is the Torah there called tushia? Mipnei shehu mateshet kocho shel adam. So, now, mateshet is going to be a word, and they're making puns. Taf, shin is the pun. Tushia is wisdom. Mateshet means to make weak in Aramaic. All right, so why is Torah called wisdom there? Because it is mateshet et ha'adam, because it makes man weak. Why is that a good thing? Why does wisdom make man weak, and why is that a good thing? Well, what do men like to do with their strength?
Show off.
Exactly. They want to be heroic, and they want to be virile, and they want to be powerful, and they want to be arrogant and egotistic. And the Torah tempers all of that. Right? So that's good. It weakens them, and that's why it's called tushia. Those are two different words, tushia and mateshet. They're not the same word. It's a pun. They're playing around. Okay. Here it's being translated as incorporeal, which is, they're doing that because there's an argument among the Rishonim about what these words mean. So they're following one particular stream. Davar acher, tushia devarim shel tohu sheha'olam mishutat alehem. Tushia is words which are incorporeal upon which the world is founded.
Incorporeal.
Yeah, what does incorporeal mean? Tohu is really the Vaharatai tohu vavohu in the Bereshit story, and it's the abyss or chaos. Doesn't mean incorporeal. By the time you get to incorporeal, you're taking other people's later philosophies about creation, and you're reading them back into this Gemara, which may not be legitimate. But it's not our topic for today. For our purpose, you just say that Tushia is Torah because the world is based on Tohu, whatever Tohu is, and obviously the world was based on Torah, so that's what it is. Amar Ula. Ula comes in and he says, Machshava mo'elet afilu l'divrei Torah. It's another interpretation of Tushia. He's going to say thoughts, Machshava, mo'elet afilu l'divrei Torah. That thoughts cause him or energize him, even the words of Torah. There's an interesting note here from Rashi. This means that the plans that a man confidently makes, by this and this day I have accomplished such and such, even these plans involve Torah study, they aid in the undoing of these plans. So you're thinking, man plans, God laughs, right? Machshavo mo'elet afil divrei Torah. Even for your words of Torah, thoughts regarding a livelihood cause him to forget even the words of Torah. So Tushia here is the opposite will be the opposite of that, because your own arrogance caused you to forget Torah. Shnei Amar, Mefer machshavot arumim v'lo ta'asena yedehem tushia. He abolishes the thoughts of the clever, and their hands will not accomplish wisdom. Tushia. So if you think too much, you don't get to be wise. And so that's what Tushia means, wisdom. Amar Rabbah. So Rabbah is going to come and comment about Ula's comment about Tushia. Im asukim lishma ena mo'elet, but if he's engaged in Torah lishma, then his thinking will not have him forget his Torah learning. Shneimar rabot machshavot belev ish v'atzat Adonai hi takum. As it is written, many are the thoughts of the heart of man, but the counsel of God endures forever. Etza sheyesh ba devar Hashem hi takum leolam. Any thought or counsel that has in it a word of God endures forever. Full stop. That is the end of the digression.
So there are saying man proposes and God disposes or so.
Exactly. Man proposes and God disposes. Right? Man trach and God laughs. Right? Man plans and God laughs. Right. You think so much. So let's see what we had very quickly, and then we'll stop. What's the rabbit hole we just went down? Okay, so that we can get back to where we belong. All right. Shavi'it. All right, is the Sochrei Shavi'it are forbidden. Okay? Where did we go from the Sochrei Shavi'it? Kohanim and Truma in the pile, right? So the Kohanim are suspected. Where did he go from Kohanim? Reish Lakish had a story that involved these guys, but along the way, there were a couple of Kohanim messing with Shavi'it. So the two guys and the moon, and the Shavi'it piece of that story. Okay? And from that, Reish Lakish concluded that a Kesher Rishaim cannot be part of the Beit Din. Once we had the Kesher Rishaim, right? And now I've run out of letters and numbers. Kesher Rishaim is Shevna and Chizkiah. And in Shevna and Chizkiah, we learned Psalms. Right? And in Psalms, we had the word Shatot. Okay? And from Shatot, we learned Torah. But under the Shatot, we had A, B, and C about the Shatot being destroyed, and it was either Chizkiah or the Beit HaMikdash or the thoughts of Shevna, the thoughts of the Rishaim. But out of that, we had the word Tushiyah, which is the wisdom of Torah, and we learned that whatever plans you have that include Torah in them will last forever, but plans you have that don't have Torah can destroy even Torah. Full stop. So this whole kind of down the rabbit hole digression has now come to a close, and actually, Shvi'it is not A. What is A? A is dice. B was
Pigeons or
Yonim. And C was Shochrei Shvi'it. Shochrei Shvi'it, right? So we had just done a bunch about the Yonim, and we got back to Shvi'it, and that's where it took us. And what do you think is going to be next?
Dice.
Dice. We're going to come right back to here. All right? So the fact that the next paragraph is about the dice player makes sense if you're following kind of the structure of the Gemara. But today's lesson was this rabbit hole. And now we're out of it. Now we're done. Fair enough? Good. We got through it. Congratulations. Rabbit holes can be fun. And that's it for today. We'll see you again, not next week. I'm off next week for President's Day.
Okay.
And then we're back after that.